I would like to begin my message this morning by asking you a couple of simple questions. How thankful are you really for the salvation you have been given in Jesus Christ? And do you really understand what God did in saving you? You see, there is a link between thankfulness and understanding. A link that we oftentimes do not practically embrace. There's a reason that the Bible spends so much time on what happened to us and not just the consequences of what happened to us. Many Christians in the modern church, if not most, want all the time spent on the consequences, on the application of our Christian experience. I agree that we need to know how God wants us to live and face life. But much of the scriptures describe what took place, and they do so for a particular reason. The reason that the Bible does so is because Christians, listen, who do not fully understand what took place in their salvation, do not fully know either how to live the Christian life or the thanksgiving and gratitude with which they should live it. Our thanksgiving is impacted by our understanding of not just the depth of sin from which we were extracted, but also the ethnic distance from which we were drawn. And follow me here, church. As reformed individuals, we know well the first of these, and we languish in so much ignorance regarding the second one. Let me explain. If you would ask us about the depth of sin from which we were extracted, we would naturally turn to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, and talk about how we were dead in our trespasses and sins, walking about as spiritual zombies, physically alive, but spiritually dead. And then we would refer to how God raised us from the state that we were in by grace through faith. And we would be excited about the fact that we were saved from the depth of sin, and rightfully so. But do you know, church, that's only half of that chapter. Listen to the second half of Ephesians chapter 2 as Paul described the ethnic distance from which you were drawn. Listen to this. Paul says, therefore, verse 11 of chapter 2 of Ephesians, therefore remember that you, put your name in there, the Gentiles in the flesh who are called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. Remember that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Wow. Do you see what Paul is saying here? You were in as much trouble because of your ethnicity as you were because of your spiritual death. You see, you were completely separated from the solution to your sin, far away from it. You had no hope whatsoever of a cure for your sin because of your ethnicity, an ethnicity that you couldn't change. But notice the second big but in this chapter. We liked the but earlier, but look at this but in verse 13. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly far off have been brought near. How? By the blood of Christ. Amen. Watch this, watch this, watch this. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, that in himself he might make the two into one new man, hallelujah, thus establishing peace. But watch this. and might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. And he came and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have our access in one Spirit to the Father. Wow. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are God's household, having built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit. Wow. Oh my goodness. I thought verse 1 through 10 was exciting. How about 11 through 22? Do you see what's going on here? You and me, we're Gentiles. We're far removed from the means of grace. We were on the far fringes, on the outskirts of how salvation was to be experienced. Not only dead in our trespasses and sins, but separated from God and his divine means. But what did God do? God in Christ brought you near in spite of your ethnic deficiency. He brought you near and spoke peace, race-defying peace, to both those who were naturally near, the Jews, and those who had been ethnically far away, Gentiles, placing us into one new man. Wow! You want to talk about what the gospel can do? Well, we don't have time this morning, but I dare you. I double dare you this afternoon to read Romans chapter 11. I double dare you. In that text, Paul indicated that we as Gentiles should be so thankful that God, listen to this, church, cut off from the Jews' own olive tree, their own olive tree. He cut off branches, natural branches. He disregarded those branches and cast those branches into hell, and in their place, he put you and me. Somebody didn't get saved so you could get saved. God cut off the natural branches. He cut them off. And in his place, he took you and me unnatural. Our ethnicity made us unnatural branches, and he grafted us in. Good gracious. What a God. We ought to be so thankful today that we unnatural branches, due to our ethnicity, have been made a part. Oh, you ought to read Romans chapter 11 this afternoon and rejoice. But this morning, in our text, we'll see an important message from Jesus, our Savior, through Mark on the groundwork that was laid for our ethnic inclusion. One of the reasons that we're not as thankful about our salvation as we ought to be is because of our ignorance of what God has done for us in this regard. We're ignorant. We don't really comprehend what it took to get Gentiles into the people of God. We don't understand what it means to be a Gentile and now be a co-heir with the Jews in the kingdom. That's crazy. That is crazy. But that's what the gospel does. I pray that our understanding of what has taken place will be advanced this morning. Well, let's not abide in ignorance. Let's understand something. Before we begin applying salvation, we need to understand our salvation. And the reason that there's so much ignorance and confusion on how the gospel applies in our situation today is because we don't understand what happened to us. And as long as we don't understand what happened to us, we're still going to go on in ignorance trying to apply something we don't even comprehend. Oh man, I don't got time to that. Let me just stick to the text here. Our text this morning is derived from the part of this part of Mark's gospel where we see the servants, Jesus' tragic rejection by the leadership. Begins in chapter 11, verse 12, and goes to chapter 13, verse 37. Although Jesus had entered the city of Jerusalem as their rightful king, in fulfillment of the angel's words to Mary and the prophet's message to the nation, things were not so pleasant and receptive below the surface of the joy and celebration that greeted Christ. People were happy that Christ was coming, but below the surface, there was something simmering. In fact, nothing had actually changed from his prior 3 years of ministry, where he was wildly popular with the people of Israel themselves, but completely resisted by the leadership who controlled the spiritual mechanisms and experiences of the people. So the people loved Jesus, the leadership hated Jesus. And this bifurcation will come to a head here in the first half of the week leading up to the Passover and Jesus' death. This exposing of the underlying separation that would not come as a surprise or shock to Jesus. Jesus would not be surprised at what's going on here. Everybody else might be, because everybody was saying Hosanna, Hosanna to the highest. They were rejoicing over Christ, but Christ was not moved by their praises, because he knew what they were like on the inside. In fact, Jesus was well aware of the fact that no response to him by the people of Israel was going to change the ironclad resistance that the leadership was having towards him. It is this fact, Jesus' knowledge and awareness of his quickly approaching rejection, not his enthronement, that will lead him to lay out before the men what will take place. Now Christ is going to lay this out for them. They won't get it right now, but they will get it later. In chapter 11, verses 12 to 26, Jesus reveals and responds to Israel's problem. Now, if you follow me when I read this text, you'll notice that Mark presents what happens here differently than Matthew did. If you read this account in Matthew, the incident with the fig tree seems to occur on one day. It all seems to take place on one day. But it's clear from Mark's gospel that the fig tree was encountered on one day and cursed. Then the day concluded, and on the next morning when Christ went back into town, that's when they noticed the fig tree had withered. So this really takes place over 2 days. And in between the cursing and the outcome of the cursing is the temple. Oh, don't miss this. The structure tells you a lot about what's going on here. Jesus meets the fig tree. He curses the fig tree. He goes into Jerusalem and he tears up the temple. And then he goes home, and he comes back the next day and the fig tree has withered. Okay. Understand the structure of what's going on. Let's get into this text. First off, notice with me, Jesus prophesies about their rejection of him. Verses 12 through 14. Let's read these verses again. And on that day, on the next day, when they were departed from Bethany, he became hungry. And seeing at a distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he answered and said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples were listening. Now, as noted earlier, Bethany, I told this a couple weeks ago, Bethany was within a couple of miles of Jerusalem. It allowed Jesus easy access to Jerusalem without being right in the middle of the religious leadership's power structures. Accommodations in Jerusalem would have been sparse, so most travelers to these Jewish feasts would have stayed in the surrounding cities rather than in Jerusalem. They would have stayed with friends and family. Jesus' friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, lived in Bethany, so that's where Jesus stayed. He stayed with Martha, Mary, and Lazarus during this particular Passover. We do not know the exact time frame of this text, but apparently it took place, it was probably in the morning. Early in the morning, Christ got up and got ready to go into Jerusalem, and as he was walking into Jerusalem, our text says that Jesus became hungry. I don't know if you caught that, but God became hungry. Jesus embraced humanity fully. He was fully God and fully man. Other gospels will say he got tired or he got thirsty. Mark says he got hungry. That was part of his he identified with us fully and completely. The identification of Jesus being hungry is what led to the encounter with the fig tree that was in this particular region. Now, as you read the story, you can get the idea that there was only one fig tree on the way to Jerusalem from Bethany, but that would be a big mistake. As I noted at the beginning of our study of this section, Bethphage and Bethany were in close proximity to each other and to Jerusalem. Let me give you their names. Bethphage literally means, here's what it means, the house of the unripe figs. Bethphage literally means the house of the unripe figs. Bethany, the city Bethany, literally means house of dates. House of dates. In other words, this region was literally inundated with fruit trees, especially fig trees and date trees. The implications of this speaks to the purposefulness of what was going on. This was not the only fig tree in the area. This area was literally covered with fig trees, covered with date trees. It was inundated with them in this particular part of Israel. Let's look at the fig a little bit closer. Of all the fruits mentioned in the Bible, the fig may be the most well-known of all of the fruits. In fact, the fig is the most ancient fruit mentioned in all the Bible. I don't know if you realize this, but the fig tree was mentioned in the Garden of Eden. You remember that, right? When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and their eyes were opened, we read in Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, that the eyes of both of them were opened and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loin coverings. This is the very first fruit tree that's mentioned in the Bible, is the fig tree. Its biblical history is very, very ancient. Other earlier references to the fig can be found in references to the Promised Land. For example, when the original spies returned from spying out the Promised Land in Numbers 13, we read that they came back with a large cluster of grapes, but not just grapes. In Numbers 13:23, they came back with pomegranates and they came back with figs as well. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 8. In Deuteronomy 8, figs appear among the list of 7 fruits that defined the Promised Land. Deuteronomy chapter, I want to read verses 7 through 9 of Deuteronomy 8. That's what it says. This is God describing the Promised Land. He says, "For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you shall eat food without scarcity, in which you shall not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills you can dig copper." Again, the fig and the fig tree. With this long history, we're not surprised that historical accounts indicated that the fig was cultivated early in man's history. But figs were not just cultivated. fig trees grew naturally in this area. They were a natural part of the countryside. Their bountiful appearance or occurrence in the promised land led to their usage as an illustration of great prosperity. And this is very interesting. One of the uses of the idea of the fig was given by Micah when he described what the kingdom was going to be like. How prosperous the kingdom would be. Listen to this. Micah, he does this in Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. And this is what he says in Micah chapter 4, verse 4. This is the kingdom. He says, and each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree. That's how you know you're blessed. Under his vine and under his fig tree with no one to make him afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Now, the fig tree was a sign of great prosperity. Figs were eaten in several different ways in the ancient world. I think on your overhead you have a picture of fresh figs, and the fig would have been eaten much like we eat a plum or an apple. You simply go pluck it off the tree and you'd start eating it. And so they were eaten fresh. You'd also dry figs. In other words, you'd leave them out and you'd dry them, and by drying them in the sun, you would elongate how long you could eat them. So you could store them and eat them all throughout the year. The third way, so we had fresh figs, we had dried figs. The third way figs were eaten, in fact, what we see in the Bible the most is what we call fig cakes. Fig cakes. What they would do is they would take a bunch of figs, fresh figs, they would mush those figs into a lump, and then they would dry them, and you would have a fig cake. And they would again store those and eat those all throughout the year. So we see the physical characteristics of the fig tree and its centrality to the diet of ancient Israel. It's no surprise then to the careful reader of this text that in a region dotted by fig trees, that Jesus would spot a fig tree while traveling to Jerusalem. He spotted a lot of fig trees, a lot of them, plenty of them. Given his hunger that Mark stated, Jesus' response to what he saw on the surface seems quite normal, given that his eyes fell upon a tree, and the text says the tree was in leaf. It was in leaf. It being in leaf was what distinguished it from the other trees. Just follow the text. A bunch of fig trees. Why go to that fig tree? He went to that fig tree because that fig tree was in leaf, indicating the other fig trees were not in leaf. Just follow the text. So Christ walked to the fig tree. What was he doing? Our text says he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And now most of us in the U.S. only know of fruit trees and orchards surrounded by fences, which you have to pay to pick the fruit. And not being part of a fully agrarian culture, it's hard to picture what's going on here in the mind of the appetite of Jesus. But I remember a few years ago, when I was back home in Antigua, my uncle and I were driving around the island looking for some mango trees on the side of the road from which we could pick some fruit to eat it. Now, some of you would say, just go to the supermarket. Well, that's a North American talking to you. When you live in agrarian culture, you find a fig tree on the side of the road, you go up and you pluck it and eat it because it's part of the countryside. Anyway, Jesus, while journeying, spotted a tree that he believed would satiate his hunger and went with the expectation of being satisfied. Look at the text, verse 13. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves. Well, one can only imagine, given this culture, given this time, the letdown that Christ had when his expectation of finding fruit was not met. And the story seems to be straightforward, and then it gets crazy. Because Mark says, watch this, for it was not the season for figs. It's like Mark is saying, boy, is Jesus stupid. It's not fig season. He knows it's not fig season. He goes to a tree looking for figs and is surprised. Oh, there's no figs on it. Has Jesus lost his mind? It was not fig season. Of course, there's no figs on the fig tree. Come on, Jesus, get yourself together. That's not what Mark is saying. Mark's not saying that. Let's work our way backwards. First off, let's begin with the fact it's not a season for figs. This is not fig season, and rightfully so. This is the Passover. They were nowhere near fig season. Everybody in Israel knew that. This was not the time for figs. Although it was not fig season, what did Mark say about the tree? It was in leaf. Oh, don't just read stuff in your text and miss it. It wasn't fig season, but the tree was full of leaves. It was full out leaves in it. That is why Jesus went to that tree. Keep following me. The fact that the tree was in full leaf without it actually being fig season implied that the tree was experiencing an accelerated growth cycle. In other words, although it was too early for figs, this tree gave off all the indications that figs should be expected. Oh, you're not following me this morning. You're not following me this morning. The signs of life were there, but no life. Oh, follow the text. Christ sees the tree in full leaf. Oh, that tree sure enough got to have fruit in it. Goes over to the tree, begins looking and finds nary a fig, and it's clear that although the tree looked like it was alive, guess what? It was really dead. It had signs of life. As you looked at it, it appeared to be alive. It appeared to be growing. It appeared to be producing what you would expect a fig tree to produce. Understanding this reality helps us to hone in on exactly why Jesus responded the way he responded. And he answered and said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples were listening. Jesus pronounced a judgment against the tree, indicating that fruit would not be eaten from that tree again because the tree gave off false signals of life. It looked like it was alive, and it really was not alive. So Jesus says, become what you really are, which is dead. We're not told how Jesus would assure that no one ate from this tree again yet. But this only paints, remember, half the picture. This is only half the story. There's another story the next day. We're not going to get to that until next week. But this week, what we see in this text is that Jesus spots a tree that looks like it's alive on his way to Jerusalem to encounter in the temple. He sees a tree, it looks like it's alive, it's really not alive, so Christ judges that tree and says, ain't nobody gonna eat fruit from you again, boom, and moves on. The tree looked alive, but wasn't alive. We then come to the next part of Mark's account, where Jesus states the focus of his ministry and his message, verses 15 through 18. Look at this text. Let's read these verses. Verse 15. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began casting out those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple. And he began to teach and say to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you've made it a robber's den? And the chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him. For all the multitude was astonished at his teaching. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, Jesus immediately made his way back to the temple again. You remember, on the first day when Jesus got there, it was late at night. He went to the temple, but it was late at night, and so he went back home. Well, he went back to where he was staying. And so this is day 2. So he comes back to Jerusalem and he goes right back to where he had started out. But he's not going to the temple to worship and offer sacrifices. Remember, the previous day, he went to the temple to check it out. He looked at all that was going on. He went to all the different parts of the temple and checked out what was going on. And now he comes back. And he comes back aggressive. Mark pictured Jesus in a way that we have never seen him before in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus was ticked. Where's the Jesus meek and mild? Jesus was physically aggressive. He acted in a physically assertive way. Casting out, overturning, not permitting. The term cast out is a word that we've seen used in the Gospel of Mark to describe the exorcisms, the casting out of demons. This wasn't the first time that we saw it in the Gospel of Mark. If you look at Mark chapter 1, verse 12, you see this word was used in reference to Jesus himself. In Mark 1, verse 12, it says this, and immediately the Spirit impelled Jesus to go into the wilderness. The word impelled is the same word here for casting out, impelled. To impel means to propel or to throw. It's an emphatic, it's a form of an emphatic term in the Greek for throwing. It means to expel, to repel, to throw out, usually with force. To do something with force. Clearly, Jesus' actions in the temple had force behind them. Jesus, this might not be the picture of Jesus that you like, but Jesus was physically manhandling certain individuals and their property. He was manhandling them. He was physically getting in people's faces. And he was expelling them out of the temple. Our text says those who were buying and selling in the temple. Now, at first it might seem strange that there were individuals carrying out commerce in the temple, but this had become a part of the worship system of this day. The sacrificial system of Israel required certain animals, and they had to be unblemished. Well, what they would do is people who brought animals with them, they'd tell them, you know what, that animal doesn't fit the bill. If you go around the corner right over there in that part, you can get a really good animal. So they had cornered the market on acceptable sacrifices. And guess what? You can buy what you need right here in the temple. Rather than being offered off-site, these services were offered within the temple grounds themselves. One can only imagine the noise and the commotion that would have been taking place as people bartered and argued over pricing. This led to the second thing that Jesus did. He was overturning the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. Do you see Jesus? Grab the table, just shoot. People sitting down selling doves, kick the chair out from underneath them. What the text says. fit your model of Jesus. But do you understand? Jesus was sure enough ticked off. He had a righteous anger. And he took those tables and flipped the tables. Now, what's going on here? The tables of the money changers. Many of the worshipers who came to the temple during these high festivals would come from the Jewish diaspora. And they would come with Greek and Roman coins. Well, you can't bring that Gentile trash money up into the temple. You might use that back where you're from, but as a Jew, when you come home to our home country, you got to use our money. You can't use that Greek and Roman stuff. Go over here, and you know what? We happen to have some money changers right over there in the temple for you. Because when you came to the temple, you were from the diaspora. What do you have to do? You had to pay your temple tax. And temple tax couldn't be paid with Greek and Roman money. Temple tax had to be paid with temple money. And if you're going to buy an animal in the temple, don't bring that Greek and Roman stuff in here. You got to get Jewish money to be able to buy in the temple. You see what's going on here, church? And you know what we do for you? Guess what? We got a couple of banks, on-site banks. So you don't got to walk all the way to the other end of Jerusalem. We got it right here for you. I know that there's a place over there, but that's going to take you a while to get through all the people. Right here in the temple, we got a little something for you. Just go over to brother so-and-so or brother so-and-so, and he's got a little table there with all the right coins in bags and boxes, and you can just turn in your Greek and Roman trash and get some Jewish money. Can you imagine the exchange rate and the overcharging for convenience that was taking place in God's house? It must have been astronomical. One can only imagine that some pretty cushy deals were set up to be able to have your own table there, especially during the Passover. Tables full of bags and boxes of coins. Well, what happens when you flip a table with bags and boxes of coins on it? Coins everywhere. Coins everywhere. Christ says, and coins flying everywhere. You can imagine people scrambling trying to get their coin. Christ was ticked. And then kicking out the chairs of the people who sold doves. What a terrible thing. These dove sellers, doves were the sacrifice that the poorest of the Jews gave. And I can imagine what they were selling doves for in the temple. But Jesus wasn't finished with his rampage yet. People were using the temple as a cut-through, as a shortcut. You remember the picture of the temple I showed you? I think I have a temple picture. I think it's slide 15. If you go toss it up for us. So this is on the east. This is the whole temple site, and it's on the eastern side of Jerusalem. People would use this coming from the east, and they would cut through from one side of the temple to the other side. And so they were using it as a cut through. Now, this was a way for them to get quick access from one side of the temple to the next, so they wouldn't have to go around it to get to the other side of Jerusalem. Jesus was making it difficult for anyone to do that, blocking their way, telling them to go around, making sure that they didn't travel through the temple grounds. Well, you know, when people got bags on their shoulders and walk through the temple, Christ said, not in here, bro. No, not in here. Take that stuff and go right around. Can you imagine? Do you think people took that well? Do you think maybe someone tried to get around Christ? Oh, no, bro. No, not here. I can walk this all day long. You going around. Christ was physically accosting people. What? This isn't the Jesus I know about. What's going on? In summary, what had happened was that there had developed over the years a rather raucous environment surrounding the temple area. People were bartering and haggling over cost and exchange rate in the church. Prices were inflated because of the supply and the demand. Supplementary businesses had sprung up because of the free flow of money that was existing there. Also, people, because of the breakdown in the temple, began using the temple area and the courts of that temple as a shortcut through the city. Now, if you're like me, you ask the question, how in the world did this take place? How in the world? What's the only way for this to have happened? Leadership. The only way. The high priest and the priestly caste that supported him had been selling rights to commercial industry to come into the temple, and the high priest and his family were enriching their back pocket. The temple had become a cash cow for the priests and the high priest and the merchant class, who was able to buy access to carry on their businesses within the temple itself. Can you imagine how much people bid it? If you were a merchant selling lambs, selling doves, can you imagine how much you paid? Can you imagine how much competition there was? Oh man, the high priest could ask any price. Can you imagine if you're a banker with some coinage, and can you imagine the competition to have exchange tables in the temple? All these worshipers pouring in. This is Passover. This is the most, the population of Jerusalem quadrupled, if not more, during Passover. Oh, the amount of money was flowing was heavy. Can you imagine what you'd pay just to get a table in there to do some exchange? And the exchange rate was up to you. Whatever you could get. The Passover would have been like our Christmas time. They selling hard, baby. Because what I make now, that's going to fix me the whole year. So they were selling hard. And this table was trying to outdo that table, Hey, I got a better deal for you. In the temple, can you imagine? I got a better deal over here. Come buy my dove. Come buy my lamb. Oh, I got a better exchange rate. Come over. I'll give you 2 for what he's giving you. Can you imagine? Where in the temple would this have taken place? The only place, listen church, the only place large enough and far enough away from the central worship place would have been the court of the Gentiles. And history tells us that's exactly where it took place. In the court of the Gentiles. Listen, church, the one place Gentiles would have been able to come to worship, and the one place in which the nations of the world had access to the God of Israel had been essentially turned into an animal stockyard and a place of economic usury. Wow. The one place you and me could go to worship. The one place that you and me were accepted. They were selling lambs and doves. They were exchanging money. They were using that to cut through from one side of the city to the next side of the city. One could imagine that the sincere worshiper would have been met with a very distracting environment in which to worship, and Jesus was ticked. But not only in his actions, in his words. Jesus, having cast out, overturned, and stopped, then began to open his mouth, and oh my goodness, when he opened his mouth, woo, you thought his actions were off the chain. Wait till you understand what he said. Jesus, as he often does, quoted the Bible. Jesus is trying to give justification for his physical outbursts. Why in the world he's overturning tables? Why in the world he's casting folk out? Why in the world he's stopping? Why? Because of the Bible, Christ says. He quotes two texts, one from Isaiah 56 and one from Jeremiah 7. Just watch what Christ does here. The first part of this quote is taken from Isaiah. Turn it with me, Isaiah chapter 56. Isaiah chapter 56. Now, the context of Isaiah 56 is rich. It's rich. In this chapter, now listen to this closely, church. In this chapter, Isaiah is envisioning the Messianic era. He's envisioning it. So the Messiah has come. The kingdom has come. The Messianic time has come. So that's Isaiah 56. This era would bring with it not just the restoration of the Jewish people to their God, verses 1 and 2, but also it would bring the foreigner would also be a part, and he would join the people of God. So the children of Israel would be brought together, verse 1 and 2, but the foreigner would also be included. Now notice the words of the prophet after identifying particular groups of foreigners in verses 3 and 4. Look what he says in verse 5. To them, I will give in my house and within my walls a memorial and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name which will not be cut off. Wow. Listen to what God's saying. God is speaking to Gentiles, you and me, non-Israelites, ethnically excluded people. And look what he says. I'm going to give them a name, and the name will be given in my house. What's God's house? What's God's house? The temple is God's house, church. In my house, within my walls, a memorial. God said, I'm going to give them a name. These non-Jews, these ethnically excluded people, I'm going to give them a name. And that name is going to be better than son and daughter. Better. And I'm going to give it to them in my house. But wait, it gets better than that. This is the tip of the iceberg. We've not even gotten to the quote that Jesus gave yet. Before that quote, I want you to notice that God indicated that there would be a uniting of both the foreigners, that is Gentiles, and the Jews. God's people would be brought into one. These two different ethnicities, Jew and Gentile, would be united. Look at verse 6 and verse 8. Verse 6 and verse 8. Also, the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant. Verse 8, the Lord God who gathers the dispersed of Israel declares, yet others I will gather to them, to those already gathered. This is unity, church. This is unity. God is saying, I'm going to unify all the ethnicities under one head, under me, under God. And the quote of Jesus is verse 7. In between verse 6 and verse 8, we get verse 7. Listen to this. It says this. even those, who are those? The foreigners, I will bring to my holy mountain, what's that? Jerusalem, and make them joyful, where? In my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. Why? For my house will be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Listen, church. When we talk about the peoples of the world, we love to go to Revelation and talk about, how John saw a vision and he saw all the peoples, all the tongues, and all they were rejoicing before the throne. And that's fine. That's great. But long before Revelation, in the Old Testament, God already said, I'm bringing the groups together. I'm going to unite them where? In my house of prayer. This house that was meant to be a house to unite the peoples of the world. Do you see what's going on here, church? The temple was to stand as a symbol of the plan of God to bring all his people together, Jew and Gentile, in joyful worship and glorification of his name. It was designed to be a meeting place of the redeemed of the Lord from all the nations, a house of prayer for all the peoples. Now, how would it get to be that? How would that happen? By the Jews not only being an example of it by participating in authentic, joyful worship of God themselves, but by the Jews taking the message of salvation to the nations and compelling them to come in too. That was the mission of the nation of Israel, and they failed. They failed their mission. When Christ came in to the court of the Gentiles, what did he see? Did he see Gentiles gathering in the court to worship the true God? Did he see them praying and lifting their hands to glorify him? Is that what he saw? Oh, no. He saw money changing. He saw people selling animals, selling doves. You want to believe he was ticked? This house that was meant to bring the peoples together, this house what was meant to be a sign of my blessing on all ethnicities, Jew and Gentile, this house that was to bring them all together is being used now to keep them apart. Did Jesus find the nations being welcomed into a joyful celebration with the nation of Israel? No. The very place designed for the peoples to worship had been converted into something else. What he found was a nation unconcerned about God's vision for the nations and their divine mission for accomplishing it. What he found was a people who believed that their race and ethnicity was the only one that counted. What he found was the people unconcerned with the plan of God. How was God going to, as Isaiah 56:7 says, bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer? How is that going to happen given what Jesus saw? It was not going to happen. That's the point. It's not going to happen. Do you see why Jesus was so angry here? No wonder he turned next to Jeremiah 7. No wonder. He quotes Isaiah 56. And then he turns to Jeremiah 7. Why? Listen. The Jews had mistakenly tied their spiritual and physical security to the presence of the temple. Before I get here, listen to this, church. The Jews had mistakenly tied their spiritual and physical security to the presence of the temple. And for that reason, Jesus turned to Jeremiah 7. If Isaiah 56 was about the glory of the kingdom, Jeremiah 7 is all about judgment. All about judgment. So, in Jeremiah 7, God comes to Jeremiah in verse 1 and 2 and he says, hey, look, Jeremiah, I got a message for you. Go set up shop in the gates of the temple. And I got a message I want you to take to my people. So Jeremiah goes to the gates of the temple itself. And he begins to proclaim this message. And so while he's there, of course, people are coming in and out. And he was to proclaim to all those entering that they should not believe that because of the presence of the temple in their midst, that they could take shelter in their sinful ways. Jeremiah, listen, church, was to call them to repentance as described in verse 3, and to warn them not to view the temple as a national talisman, a spiritual good luck charm, a religious rabbit's foot. Look at verse 4. Look at verse 4. Do not trust in deceptive words. This is the temple of God, the temple of God, the temple of God. See that? Let me read it again. Do not trust in deceptive words saying, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. They think that the temple would keep them safe. Instead of putting their hope in the physical presence of the temple in their midst, they should have embraced true religion. The genuine result of conversion, which meant walking after the way of the Lord, verse 6. You see, rather than trusting the temple, they should have trusted God. Yeah. Only then would they be physically secure in the land, verse 7. Jeremiah was then to expose their sin to them, how they were bold-facedly living lies, perpetually characterized by violating God's commandments from stealing to idolatry, verses 8 and 9. Now watch this. While they were stealing and worshiping idols, look at verse 10. Then coming and standing before me in this house, which is called by my name, and saying, we are delivered that you may do all these abominations. I know this is hard to understand, but listen to what Christ is saying. They would steal, they would worship false idols, and then they go to the temple and say, I'm here in the temple, now I can go back and sin later. Coming to the temple, offering sacrifices, doing what you do in the temple, and then saying, because I've done that, I can go back and do what I want to do. I don't know if you follow me. I'm going to bring this home in a minute. Because they thought that just the mere presence of the temple was their safety net, they believed that they could sin unimpugned and tag home so they could be safe from judgment to continue their sinful ways unimpeded. God's description of that is what Jesus quoted. God's description of what I just explained to you is what Jesus quoted. Look at verse 11. Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight? Behold, even I, have seen it, declares the Lord. That's powerful. That's powerful. Now, last time I checked, a temple was a place that you went to meet God, to repent from your sin, and to walk in the way of the Lord. That's what the temple's for. They had made it into a robber's den. Let me ask you a question. Why do robbers go to a robber's den? Do they go to a robber's den to stop robbing? Listen. They go to a robber's den to feel safe and secure in their robbing so they can continue to rob and steal. That's why they go. And God says, you've turned the temple into a robber's den. That's where you feel safest. You feel safe in the temple, doing all the sin you want to do, thinking you're okay because you gave God a couple of sacrifices, you followed through on what the worship leader said, so you're safe and sound and can go back and sin. The temple is nothing but a robber's den. God's answer to them was very simple. In Jeremiah 7:12-14, he said, you remember Shiloh? My name used to be on Shiloh. You know what happened to Shiloh? I burnt Shiloh down. I destroyed Shiloh. And it's very clear. God's saying, I'm bringing destruction on you. I don't care that you worship me in my temple because you've turned that temple into a robber's den. I'm going to burn it down, just like I did Shiloh. Here we see the essence of Jesus' words. It's not so much the sellers and the money changers that Jesus had in his crosshairs, but the religious system that set things up that way in the first place. Remember, these individuals could not be in the temple doing what they were doing of their own accord. They were there at the behest of the religious system of that day, a system that was broken, a system that was irreligious, a system that was completely bankrupt of any spiritual content and character, a system more concerned with being Jewish than being saved. They used people as a means of their own financial profiteering, as the prosperity church and so many evangelical churches that imitate their means and methods do today. The place of worship had become a security blanket for their sinful conduct. Surely the implications here are that just as God's message in the Old Testament ended with judgment on the temple and the system that undergirded it, Judaism, surely the same would happen to Jesus' generation. The temple and the Judaism behind it would be destroyed. And what happened in 70 AD? God burnt the house down. Used the Romans and burnt the house down. My house. You're using it as a robber's den. You think through your religious machinations that you're okay with God. You're not okay with me, God said, because I know what you're really doing. And look at our final verse today, verse 18. The leadership is hardened in their rejection. Notice their response after the pronouncement of Christ. And the chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him, for all the multitude was astonished at his teaching. While the multitudes could not put two and two together to make four, the leadership could. The judgment that would fall upon this place would surely impact every Jew, but they were completely enthralled, the multitudes with Jesus, apparently oblivious to the ultimate weight of what Christ was saying. The religious leadership, however, the system began at that time to try and take him out. They were going to destroy him, which of course in this context meant they were going to kill him. Jesus had to go. Jesus had to go. There's no way we could continue with Jesus being alive. We got to find a way to kill this guy. Although we're not finished looking at this encounter yet, we can begin to clearly see where this is going. Gentiles, excluded and confined to the outskirts of the worship of the true God, were of no interest whatsoever to the people of God. They had failed at the very core of their mission. God's design, God's plan was to bring in the peoples of the world, you and me, those who were ethnically separated from the Jews, and to make us a part of his people. Their failure would have traumatic consequences for them as a people. They trusted in the signs and symbols of religion rather than faith in God. They trusted in their Jewish heritage, their racial identity, rather than faith in God, leaving them outside of God's will and God's plan. Only Jesus can fix this situation. But church, before we start pointing fingers at them, do you know that similar problems exist in the church today? Do you know that we are so racially conscious today that I fear that we're no earthly good anymore? Like the Jews, we have become so racially superior and fixated. And I mean everybody, not just blacks, not just whites, everybody have become so racially superior and racially fixated in our minds that our mission, making disciples of all nations, not our one race, is being lost. But not only that, church, we still struggle within the church with growing up Christian rather than being Christian. I want to tell you a story today. I want to tell you a story as I close this morning. It's an interesting story. Years ago, I met a young lady whose testimony fascinated me. She had grown up in a Christian home, having had not only Christian parents, but Christian grandparents as well. She had always believed that because of this, her whole family was Christian, including her. You see, for her, her security was tied to the fact that her dad and mom were saved, so she thought for sure if she were to die, she would go to heaven to be with them. But one day in her Sunday school class, her Sunday school teacher shared the gospel with her class and communicated to them that their parents going to heaven would not get them into heaven. She was shocked. She was shocked. And at 13 years old, she received Christ as her Lord and Savior. I eventually married that girl. Her name's Teresa. But church, listen. I fear, this is my fear, that many young people in our church who think they are secure because they've been raised in Christian homes, those individuals should be more fearful than anyone. Because some of you young people have developed a pattern of deceiving yourself and your parents in the face of knowing and hearing the truth, which makes your situation even worse. You may be getting over on your mom and dad, but you aren't getting over on God. I pray that today you will talk to your mom and dad, have an honest conversation with them about where you are with Jesus, and they'll show you how you can know for sure you're saved. Stop depending on your mom and dad to get you in heaven. That's a personal decision you need to make for yourself today. The Jews were trusting everything but Jesus. Everything but Jesus. And the one and only thing that they should have trusted was Jesus. He himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.